Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Senator Vern White was born and raised in Cape Breton, where he was familiar with the police, but not for all the right reasons. However, he turned his life around and went on to become not just a police officer, but chief of one of this country's biggest cities. Vern White has had a very busy time of it recently. He has remarried, they have a new baby girl, and he has been appointed to the Senate. He joins me now to talk about life beyond politics. Senator Vern White, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's great to have you here.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks.
Now, you are currently a senator. You were a highly respected police chief here in Ottawa and a longtime police officer. But what I'm interested in, first off, is what you were like as a kid. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cape Breton Island, a small place called Scotchtown, just outside New Waterford, which was a coal mining town in Cape Breton Island. My dad was a coal miner for 38 years, I guess. Yeah. Mom was a homemaker. And I grew up in a rough neighborhood. You know, most people in my neighborhood I went to a federal institution other than the RCMP, as I like to say. Most of us were involved with the law in a different way growing up, a couple of times in my case, you know, drinking and, you know what, and growing up in Cape Breton, your typical lifestyle, I guess.
Yeah.
Not always positive. I had a couple of friends who died kind of late 20s of drug overdoses and things like that. All of my brothers and sisters ended up in the social work industry, from children's aid to family services to violence against women programs, working in that industry. So my parents were very important, I think, from community meant a lot to them, you know, helping each other, helping community members. And many times I remember women from next door, a few houses down, showing up at our house and Mom patching them up and Dad going down and having a talk to the husband and stuff. Yeah, but so yeah, it was a rough time growing up, but very healthy from a family perspective, very strong family.
Your mom and dad sound like they were the backbone of the family.
They were pretty strong. Yeah, my mom, you know, 5'1", Irish, Scottish, blue eyes that could slice the top of your head off, was the strong one in the house, I would say.
Was she strict?
You know, she was strict in accountability. You know, I jokingly say I became fond of restorative justice because of my mom, because if you did something wrong, instead of my dad being the physical disciplinarian, my mom would sit there and talk about accountability and trust and honesty. And
did you listen?
Maybe
or were you just
I would pray that my dad would come and beat me. It was much easier than this. So no, you absolutely listened. Yeah, but it was very hard, you know. Owning something as a 15-year-old when you do something wrong is much more difficult than being punished.
Right.
Owning it was tough. So that was my mom. My mom was that kind of person, whereas my dad was much more reactive. He was his dad actually was a Leblanc, French, from the west coast of Newfoundland, and his mom was a Benoit, a mixed First Nation French from the west coast of Newfoundland. So much more quick to respond than my mom was. My mom was much more, we're going to have a social discussion about what we've done wrong, and you're going to own it before we're done.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but I had a great childhood.
You had a big family too, is that right? Like,
yeah, brothers and sisters. Well, I have an oldest brother. My dad's first wife died. He moved away before I was born, actually, the same time I was born. But there was 5 of us that grew up in the same house together. A small
That's a good
house.
number of kids.
Yeah, a bathroom for some of that time, you know, an outdoor bathroom for some of it.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
But again, I can say a great childhood.
Is it true that your family changed their last name?
Yeah, so my grandfather was Leblanc, moved to Cape Breton Island, and in fact I have his and his wife, Rose Benoit's birth certificate, and it was Benoit and Leblanc. Changed their name to Cape Breton, and he used to, my dad would say there was 2 stories. One was to get a job in the coal mines, because the coal mines back then typically would hire English, Scottish, Irish, and not a whole lot of French. And my dad would say, and possibly because he was being looked at for some rum running from Saint-Pierre-Miquelon as well. So it might be a combination of both. Either story is a funny story, and I'm sure probably partially true.
So they became white.
Yeah, they became white, that's right.
White.
Yeah.
you talked about your dad as a coal miner. Was that ever a career that you thought you'd pursue?
You know, my dad would never. All of my friends, or most of my friends, ended up in the coal mines.
Yeah.
Their parents
just because it was naturally assumed.
Well, and their parents, their dads would get them a summer job.
Right.
My dad would never get us a summer job in the coal mine. The last place he wanted us was in the coal mine.
So what would he tell you to do?
Anything.
Anything.
Anything other than. Although he loved it, and he did. He loved coal mine. He started when he was 13 or 14, so that's all he knew. But
if he
would
loved
not want us to do it.
Why not?
Yeah, because he knew. I mean, he died of black lung. All of his friends would have black lung and die younger than they should. And from his perspective, it wasn't a lifestyle that was good enough for his kids. You know, we all have this.
Yeah.
You know, whatever I've done, I want my kids to have a better opportunity. Well, my dad was very clear on that.
So what did you do?
Well, I graduated from high school. I did a 2-year business diploma at the College Cape Breton. I worked with young offenders for a couple of years. I was bartended, and in fact decided to become a police officer as a result of bartending. I was bartending, and these 2 officers used to come in on a Friday night after work in a small pub, and I would ask lots of questions about policing because my earlier interactions with the police wasn't so positive. Right?
So these guys were just nice, and you...
They weren't nice. One of them just said you should do a ride-along, and I told him I had some earlier ride-alongs.
And?
That didn't go over so great. But he convinced me to do a ride-along, and I did hundreds of hours of ride-alongs with the RCMP and fell in love with it.
Check it out, or just
after the first day, it was an addiction. I couldn't believe that there was a job out there where you could have such an impact in your community so quickly. You know, I went to a call in reserve mines, domestic violence call, and within minutes of being there, we had a guy in the car, we had the kids back in the house, still crying. Everybody seemed to be in a better place than they were when we arrived. I couldn't believe that job existed.
Yeah.
So then I decided, you know, I think I would like to do this. It took me a couple of years to get in, but I got in the RCMP, went through the RCMP Training Academy, and graduated in '82, and was posted to Newfoundland, Stephenville, Newfoundland, where my grandparents were from, actually.
No kidding. Yeah. How long were you in Newfoundland?
I was in Newfoundland for 2 years, 82, 84, Nain, Labrador for 2 years after that. And that's when I got my northern addiction, I tell people, addicted to these Aboriginal communities and the difference you can make in those communities.
You were up north for a really long time.
Yeah, from 84 till 2003.
Is that a normal amount of time in terms of general postings?
No, most people will go north kind of 4 to 5 years and then find the province they want to move to. And I just couldn't leave. I fell in love with it. And I actually rose through the ranks from constable to commanding officer of Nunavut in the north.
Wow.
And I loved it, every part of it.
What did you love about it? Because it's, I mean, it's a totally different experience than a city police officer would have.
Yeah, it is.
Even in some cases a town police officer would have. And you've got a huge amount of territory that you're covering.
Yeah.
And it's isolated.
Yeah, so there's a couple. One, to be fair, one of them is the fact that you can also have a huge impact easily, right, and quickly. You know, a small community, you can actually do something to have a greater impact, I thought. The second part is that there was lots to do. I love being a police officer every day. There was the last day as a police officer, I still loved it. So if you love being a police officer, there was a lot of opportunities. You would the crime rates obviously are higher, so as a young constable you got to do things you wouldn't get to do in the south. But for me the big thing was about an opportunity to make a difference in some of those communities was spectacular, and if you engaged at all they were very welcomed, and there wasn't a community I worked in the north I didn't feel welcome, which was important to me.
But you also had nowhere to go if you wanted some downtime, I have to assume. Like you were always
24/7.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I remember serving subpoenas and summonses with my daughter, who at the time was 3, on the back of an ATV driving around the community on a Saturday, you know, going door to door serving subpoenas for court that was coming Monday. But I did see that as a calling more than an occupation. You know, it really was. I didn't mind it being my job 24/7. I loved it. It's maybe why I felt the same way about being chief as well.
Did your family love it though?
I mean, they had times that not loving it probably was there. And my daughters would talk about some communities that we worked in that were difficult. But I don't think they were born in the north. You know, one when I was in Nunavut and one in Yellowknife. So I don't know that they knew different.
Yeah, and I think for kids, that's the truth too, right? It is all you know. It's all you know. You grow up.
Yeah. So other people may say it must be tough to have a dad who's a police officer. That's all they know.
Right.
They didn't have another dad who wasn't a police officer. They didn't have a time when it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
My youngest daughter in particular still talks about, being with me in the car, going somewhere, and all of a sudden I'd jump into the car and run over to arrest somebody, call the office, and get somebody to come. Just
another Saturday with Dad.
And in fact, when I was the chief here, she happened to be in the vehicle with me when I picked up an impaired driver.
No kidding.
I gave her the cell phone to call the office to get a police car to meet us there because I wasn't in uniform, and the guy was all over the road. And I told her, if he, I wasn't sure where it was going. If he gets the upper hand when I take him out of the vehicle, you put this in drive and drive away far away as you can from the scene, kind of thing.
Wow.
But she knew exactly what to do. She's been there before.
Sure. And it's just secondhand, really.
It was. No, it wasn't a surprise to her that I would do it either. And she was 17 then. Did
you have anyone back at home? Anyone who was an administrator or whatever saying to you, okay, you've got to move out of there now, you've got to move along, or does that not happen?
In the RCMP?
Yeah.
I had many mentors who would say, okay, you've done what you can here, it's time, your next transfer should be south to the following provinces to get some other experiences. But those same people, when something happened, and the good example was I was the primary investigator in a giant mine investigation. So I was scheduled to go south the next year. I end up in Yellowknife and some other things and end up working on the giant mine as they're working on it. And the next thing you know, the commanding officer who said you really have to find a place to go next year is saying we'd like you to take over as the lead investigator on this homicide. That's going to take a couple of years probably. So, other things happen that keep you there. And then 2 years later, you're finishing that, you get promoted to sergeant, which means you're staying 2 more years. So it just seems to never go away. In my case, it just seemed to never have that opportunity to actually get away from it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't exactly pursuing it. I could have said no many times, I want to go south. But I wasn't pursuing it. I was always pursuing, my dream of an opportunity, So.
Right. So why in the end did you go south?
I was a commanding officer of Nunavut, which is the top rank in the north.
Can't go any further.
You're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
They offered me a position here in Ottawa. I came to Ottawa, was promoted to assistant commissioner, and worked for a couple of years here in headquarters, which was challenging. As a commanding...
Because of the bureaucracy?
Well, as a commanding officer in Nunavut, you run an organization that spends $25 million. You have 26 detachments. You have literally run your own small police department.
Right.
Sure, you have an accountability to Ottawa, but it's pretty slow stream that runs, to Ottawa from those divisions. Whereas moving here, all of a sudden, as an assistant commissioner, you have less autonomy than you did as a commanding officer in the north.
Yeah.
It's much more challenging, and probably one of the reasons I went to be a chief of police. I wanted to kind of relive that opportunity, that experience, I guess, as a chief of police.
And you did become chief of police of Ottawa, and we were talking before the interview, you were a really public chief of police. I mean, everyone knew you. Yeah, well, everyone in the city knew.
Well, I think the public, as I say, there are very few public officials that the public immediately trust what they've just said is true. But I think that is true of the police chief for the most part. And to do that, you have to be out there when it's good and when it's bad. I think the public have to see you in both, to trust both. And the second part is I like to be involved in a lot of community organizations, and whether it was drug treatment centers or mental illness or United Way or all the other organizations I was engaged with, Maison Fraternité, Dave Smith Center, and I can go on and on, dozens. For me, I thought that was part of my job, is to drive some of their agenda if I thought it fit within the organization's agenda. And I once gave a speech where I said we would build the greatest crime prevention tool in the City of Ottawa. A drug treatment center. The average street addict in Vancouver commits 4 to 8 crimes per day. We will lower the crime rate in the city by having drug treatment centers in the city. It's not something maybe everybody would consider to be frontline policing, but I consider it to be frontline policing in my role.
We had done an interview, a print interview, though, a couple years back, and one of the things that interested me then was that you had talked about how when you first got into policing, you weren't really all that interested, or didn't really know a lot about the whole idea of restorative justice or prevention, and so that you approached policing in a different way, and now you approach policing in, I don't know if it's a more modern way, and just a different approach to how you...
Well, certainly my first few years, it was about how many people I could put in jail.
Right.
That I felt that was my job, and it almost by chance, actually, I ended up on a 2-day course in St. John's, Newfoundland on restorative justice. At the time, it was youth justice committees under the new Young Offenders Act of 1984-85. And I saw really the root cause of a lot of the criminal behavior you're seeing among young people wasn't criminal, it was social. And there's a great case out of the Yukon called Marcellus Jacob that talks about how many interventions this child had from 3 months all the way till they were an adult of 20 years when they were sentenced to 8 years in jail for sexual assault. And if any of those interventions had worked differently or positively, would it have stopped what happened when he was 20?
Right.
So I bought into that. I still believe there are many people, like Marcellus Jacob, needed to be in jail at 20 years of age to protect the public.
Right.
But there are also, I think, many opportunities for us to focus on crime prevention through social development or early intervention or an accountability piece that doesn't always include prison. And so it's a challenge to weigh these two. Right? You have some people need to be in jail for our protection, and some other people need to be engaged differently so that they don't commit crimes later. And drug intervention for me is one of those. You know, arresting people for trafficking in drugs is important, particularly if it gives us an opportunity to engage those who are addicted to get them into treatment. It's more difficult if they don't take treatment because they're going to continue committing crimes, most often committing crimes to use their drugs. And that's what we see in the city.
When you were a police officer, and maybe even still now, did you, were you always thinking about the people who were around you? I mean, were you always thinking that could be a bad guy? Because I think that there probably are people who just aren't good people, and there's people who've had a rough life and a tough go of things and make the wrong choice. Were you always thinking of that at the back of your mind when you were in a crowd or when you were, even when you were out with your family?
Yeah, I'm always thinking that.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm always thinking that.
So when you walk into a room, are you?
I'm always looking around. To tell you the truth, I almost always try to introduce myself to everyone there, see where they are.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How do you mean, where they are?
Well, when I came into this room, I shook everybody's hand.
Yes.
I wanted to know where they were, who they were. If they didn't shake my hand, I'd be a bit concerned.
Okay.
They either dealt with us or they're concerned we're going to deal with them in the future.
Do you,
so, yeah,
have you had people refuse to shake your hand because they're...
Oh, I've had, lots of times.
Wow.
And on the Hill, maybe because of politics.
So, do you think that part of it also when you were wearing a uniform, that it was an intimidating force for people, so that when you walked into a room, you're not just kind of Vern White, you're a man in uniform? Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I think there is that intimidation factor, and understandably, look, when I was, before I became a police officer or even met police officers in a social setting, I would have been intimidated. I mean, my sister, who's mid-60s now, retired after being a family service social worker for 45 years or something, she tells me she's still nervous when a police car is driving behind her. Oh, she's never done a thing wrong in her life.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, she hasn't done anything wrong in her life.
Feels the same way.
So yeah, there's always an intimidation piece. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that is a reality with this job as well.
Do you miss being the chief? Because you were a really good chief. Like, you were just so community involved.
I love being chief. I mean, it was a great job. I mean, I do think being a chief has a time limit.
Why?
Because you have to, when you first become chief, there are a number of things you change. Some of it because you want to put your stamp on it and hopefully at the same time make it better. But they have to be changed, or something else has to be changed that you missed later on. It's more difficult the second time around to change an organization. First of all, you might have to accept you did things wrong, or didn't do them as right as you hoped you did. So that's more difficult if you turn around 3 or 4 or 5 years later and say, okay, the things I did 3 or 4 or 5 years ago are wrong. I'm now going to change those, both organizationally, internally, and as well with the board, who are looking at you. So, well, didn't we just do this?
Sure.
Didn't we just expend money to change the organization?
Sure.
So that's an important piece for us as well. So it's. So I do think it's time limited, but there wasn't a day, as tough as some days were, there wasn't a day that I would have given away.
You used to wake up in the night to check your emails.
Oh yeah, it was crazy.
Do you still do that?
No.
No.
No, there's none.
There's no emails.
There's no emails. Matter of fact, about 2 weeks after I left, I woke up in the middle of the night, took my email, no emails. I took the battery out, put it back in, without realizing that I didn't need to do that anymore. Yeah, I used to do that. And the checking them is not the bad part. The bad part is you start replying, opening attachments, calling people. Somebody got hurt on duty, make a phone call real quick, see if they're okay at the hospital. That part is difficult because most people, myself included, didn't go back to sleep. So, a few hours of sleep. And so it starts to feed the beast of... I don't have to sleep every night, a couple of hours disrupted is enough, that kind of stuff.
And was it?
Oh, I think it was at the time.
Like, are
I
you
felt
a person
like it
who can
was.
function
Oh yeah, I
well?
can. I can function on,
Yeah.
on pretty limited sleep, but
Yeah.
but I'm sure it wasn't healthy. You know,
Yeah.
but it's all you know. You know, you're used
Sure.
to doing that for. I was either a commanding officer, assistant commissioner in Ottawa, or chief of police for 11 years.
Right.
So that is really a third of my career was doing
Absolutely.
that. Yeah. So and again, I wasn't complaining about it. I enjoyed
Yes.
it. Right? Yeah.
How long did it take you to establish a regular sleep pattern?
You know, quicker than I thought. About a month and a half, and I started having a regular sleep pattern, where I slept through. You know,
Wow.
didn't wake up, check my emails.
You had a scare with cancer.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
2
you
years
didn't
ago.
talk about it for a while.
I didn't tell anyone.
No.
Even my own family, I didn't tell
Really?
until after I was out of the hospital. Yeah.
Just because you weren't sure what they were going to find, or because you just couldn't process it and you didn't want people bugging you about it?
No,
or?
you know, first of all, I only had about 3 hours after I found out I had it that I was actually had the I can't believe this is me thing in my head, and then after that it was about, okay, now look, I kind of have to know what has to happen, so I started making phone calls. I need this appointment. I need my check. I wanted to make sure that I get surgery as quick as possible. So the process piece wasn't difficult for me, honestly. I felt very clear on that. But I didn't want my family to worry about me.
Right.
And at the exact same time, my sister was going through breast cancer.
Okay.
Very difficult for her.
Yeah.
She had a very tough road. And the last thing my brothers, sisters, kids needed was to have one more problem in the family. And I thought I could deal with it on my own. So I kept it to myself. Oh, yeah. I kept it to myself until the second last day while I was in the hospital.
Were they mad at you?
Oh, yeah. They're still all
I bet
pissed
they
off.
would have been mad.
Yeah.
I would have been
They were
mad.
grumpy. Yeah, they were grumpy.
Yeah. Would you do it the same way again?
Absolutely.
Would you really?
I don't know. I think so. I don't know if I would. Look, my brother made me promise I wouldn't, so when he sees this, he'll be mad at me again. But I
At
don't.
least he knows what your intentions are. Hopefully you won't ever have to deal with that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, for the time, it seemed perfectly right. You know, the last thing I thought anybody needed was to deal with my. First of all, they couldn't do anything about it. It's outside their circle of influence. I have to do this myself. So I didn't see a need for them to be engaged. And secondly, I thought it was healthier if I could give them news that was fulsome news. Like, you know, it was stage 2. You know, I don't require chemo, whatever I had. You know, instead of just I have cancer and I won't know for a month. I didn't think that would be helpful for them.
And you've got a clean bill of health.
I do. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
And you remarried.
I did
Recently.
Yeah,
well, it's been a couple of years,
2 years
now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have a lovely little girl.
Yeah, 10 months
I just
old.
saw a picture
Yeah,
of.
she's hilarious.
And she just walked.
Yesterday, it was something else.
So, do you still have a regular sleep pattern? Or has that been blown right out the window?
No, she sleeps fantastic, actually. Yeah, I mean, she wakes a little bit at night, but no, she sleeps better than I do. Sleeps more hours than I do, for sure. Yeah, I know she sleeps great.
Is it fun having a little kid at this stage? I mean, you've kind of it's got to be a lot to be doing all the things that you've done and then have a little kid too.
It's spectacular.
Is it?
Yeah, I don't know. It is fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah, and I thought it would be great because I love kids anyway, right? I mean, but this is, I can't get over how much you can love someone that you've only known for 10 months. It's spectacular. Yeah, she's fantastic.
How has the change to the Senate worked for your family life?
Oh, for sure. That's a big part of this. I mean, I still sit on, I think, 17 or 18 boards, committees, foundations in the city. I still do a lot of other stuff like I did before, maybe a bit more, actually. Probably give more time to those things now. But certainly the Senate is certainly helpful. I mean, I sit on 3 committees. I'm the chair of Aboriginal, so I have a fair amount. When we're sitting, it's a busy week.
Yes.
You know, I always say that kind of Monday at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock until midday Friday, I'm at work kind of constantly. Because you're running from 7 a.m. until late in the evening for committee meetings. Yeah. But I enjoy that as well. The committees are really good. The Aboriginal Committee is a spectacular, great group of people in the room. Everyone in the room cares about Aboriginal issues in Canada, which is nice to see. Legal constitutional is a little more formal. Yes. But again, good legislation. We see a lot of the interesting pieces that come through, so it's interesting as well.
Do you like being in the Senate?
There's times in the Senate part I'm challenged, I have to say, sitting in the Senate itself. Some people speak for the sake of, which challenges me. I like to hear the message, you know, not the messenger sometimes. So that's challenging. The committee part of the Senate, for me, is the greatest value I have. And I see the value in there, and I see what we produce. I see us being a great challenge function to issues in Canada. Aboriginal issues have always been a concern of mine, and I've worked very hard on a number of those. Now I have the opportunity to speak and look nationally at different issues. Areas I have no knowledge of, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, most of mine is in the north, which exposes me to a different area as well.
Do you think you'd find it more exciting if you ran? Not for Senate, but for office.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a question. It's probably been at the back of my mind and many people in the front of my face a lot. So I don't know. That's the discussion I'd have to have. And it's that, to be fair, is a lot different job publicly as well. You have a constituency who have greater demands than I'm used to right now. So I'd have to have that discussion as well with Sari, my wife. Yeah. But certainly I've given some thought to that. I'm really not sure.
Yeah. You've been in school for about a gazillion years.
Ever, yeah. It's true.
You just
it's true.
keep going to school.
Yeah, it's great. I can see why kids never leave.
Really?
No.
What do you love about it?
Because I learn something different every time I engage at school. The same reason I teach. I've been teaching, guest lecturing, part-time professor, sessional professor, invited professor, probably for 15 years.
Wow.
University of Alaska, at Anchorage, to University of Ontario Institute of Technology, to Australia, Charles Sturt University, India, China, Carleton and Ottawa U as well.
That's really impressive.
And I love teaching kids for the same reason, because there's not a class I ever left that I didn't learn something. And I teach in a very different way than most of their profs ever did.
How do you mean? Do you encourage a back and forth discussion?
Well, required, actually. 30% of my grade typically is about the engagement in the classroom. I like small classes, and I always have a reflective practitioner guide. They have to actually complete a reflection for me at the end of every class and send it to me. And not about what I said, but what they learned from what I said, which I like. And the minute you give credit, they work on it when there's credit for it. I always enjoyed that. So I love all of that for the exact same reason. I get an email from some student saying, you talked about this tonight and I didn't agree. So the next class, you didn't agree, let's talk about that tonight. Because it's never about agreeing, and for me, it's supposed to be about the engagement and the learning. It's not about the agreeing. Don't agree with your profs. You want to instead engage them. Typically in what I teach. Might be different in the sciences versus the social sciences. But it should be about the engagement piece is where the growth is. Yeah, so I loved it. Yeah.
Have you received your PhD yet, or are you
no,
in the process
my dissertation is in.
Wow.
Done.
Congratulations.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well,
hasn't
but
passed.
for getting that far.
Hasn't passed.
Yeah.
So I mean, now we'll see whether it passes, doesn't pass, or whether or not there'll be mild changes or major changes. But, 2.5 years, I did what I can.
2.5 years?
Yeah, writing.
Writing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
No, it was 5.5
wow.
overall. But I enjoyed that process. I never did it to complete it, to be fair. I didn't. Because I knew if I was in a doctorate program, it might be easier to teach.
Okay.
From the school perspective.
Sure.
Oh, he's in a doctorate program, let's let him teach a master's course.
Right.
So for me, that was important. I don't know that I ever thought I'd get to the point of actually completing my dissertation. All of a sudden, the courses were done. You have no choice. You have to do something else.
So are you going to go back and do another degree?
No.
No? This is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Don't you think you're going to feel a big hole in
your
life?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. My wife will thank me.
I'm sure she will.
Yeah,
I'm sure she
I joke. I said as a joke one day, geez, I should have got a law degree somewhere. She just gave me a dirty look. Like, yeah, right.
Maybe it's her turn.
Yeah. No, she completed her master's a couple of years ago, and yeah, I think she would be good in the doctorate program. She's a social worker, so we'll see.
Yeah. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate that you would take the time. I know it's a busy schedule, and
it was my pleasure.
It was great fun.
Thanks.